Miss Martha Freeland, and the date is June 12th, 2004. Miss Freeland, where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Hollow Rock, March the 20th, 1932.
March 20th, 1932.
I lived there until I was in the 8th grade, and then moved to Bruceton. Moved a long trip to Bruceton.
Long trip to Bruceton. And where did you attend school?
I attended school through the 7th grade at Hollow Rock Elementary School. Then I went to the high school here, 8th grade through high school, graduated from high school, 1949.
Who was the principal at Hollow Rock when you were there?
Probably Mr. Clark.
Mr. Clark?
Maybe Mr. Clark. I guess Mr. Clark.
Okay, and who was the principal when you moved to the high school in Bruceton?
Oh, Mr. Herndon.
Mr. Herndon. That was before he was superintendent. Who was superintendent at that time?
Well, now, I may be wrong about that. Mr. Cooper was the principal, and Mr. Herndon was the superintendent.
Okay, Mr. C.V. Cooper.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, and you graduated
49.
In 1949, and you went to work for the schools in
1962.
62, and you worked there until 1995. Could you kind of describe the changes in the school from when you first started teaching there up until you retired?
Let me read you a little excerpt from my retirement speech, and I believe that will tell you just what you're looking for, if I can find it quickly. But maybe not. Right here it is. I've gone from a manual typewriter to a sophisticated computer and everything between. But the basic things that I learned, I've got here from Miss Anita Herndon, that she taught me in those early years. You know, I was still using when I retired 33 years later. The basic principles that I was taught earlier. But, you know, I remember when we used to have to type a stencil and run it on an old drum that had ink in it, because you didn't have copy machines. You know, if you needed a bunch of stuff, you needed a transcript. You had to do it by hand. You didn't have a copy machine to put it on. And now you've just got everything's automated, and just from one end of the spectrum to the other in that 30-year period.
Okay, now your first job at the school, were you secretary at the elementary, high school, or was it all combined at the time?
When I went to work, Mr. Herndon came to my door one day. Nobody ever called me Miss Joe but Mr. Herndon. He never called me anything else. And he said, Miss Joe, I need some help with Anita, for Anita. Would you be interested in a job of filing for 3 hours a day? And I went to work just filing in the office, and then it worked into subbing some, and first thing you know, the Herndons were gone, and I was secretary, and started out secretary to the superintendent, and then a few years later, when B.C. Despine came, I went to high school principal, secretary with Mr. McGee. I mean Mr. McMackins. Mr. McMackins. Mr. Mac. Yeah, Buddy Mac. And then, you know, I just stayed in that one position the rest of the time.
Well, you just mentioned interesting and very legendary character for this area, Mr. Joe Ted Herndon, who was a very successful coach and later principal and superintendent. Could you tell me something about your high school days and what it was like? I know that I won't throw some names at you, and you may just talk. I think Miss Margaret Jenkins had a renowned glee club and band program. We had a good football program, some excellent teachers. I know Miss Anita Herndon, I always thought was a very sophisticated lady.
Yeah.
And could you just talk about your school days some and what it was like going to a ball game, going to class, and so forth?
Of course, we were in the old building, the old 2-story building.
Beautiful building.
That everybody laments over, and talks about what a shame it was that didn't remain the same when they remodeled. And I try to tell everybody it's because they don't live in it and work in it, you know, that it was pretty, had character, but it's not as functional as what we've got now. But we used to have banquets upstairs in the old hall, just the hallway, narrow hallway up by the home ec department. That's where our banquets would be. And you mentioned we had something that we don't have now. We had an auditorium in the old building, and we had glee clubs and plays and things that had a perfect spot for that. That's one maybe deficit the school system has now. They don't have an auditorium as such, and plays and things like that just don't do as well in the gym as they do in the auditorium. But ball games, when I was in school, football was at its heyday. You know, we traveled by train. We'd have a train load of people and go to the ball games and all that kind of thing. And Mr. Herman was the one that whipped that all in shape. You know, he was as well as the principal, superintendent then. He was the head coach and drove his boys hard, and I loved and respected him for it. His office was there in that building, and at that time the principal didn't maybe hold the respect that it does now. The superintendent was the big thing, and the principal just kind of, it appeared to me that the principal his job wasn't as important then as it is now. But Mr. Herman was the boss when we were in school.
Okay, outside of going to ball games, and I know in that time, as it is still today, that the school was not counting the churches, the school was kind of the center of the social functions. But outside of a ball game or a school or church functions, what would you do for entertainment? Say you had a date or you were going out with some girlfriends somewhere.
You go to the movie every time it changed.
It
didn't matter whether it was good or bad. You know, you just went to the movie because that's all there was to do. Skating rinks, we had skating rinks, and you know, you go skate.
Bruceton had a skating rink?
No, but there were skating rinks around, and you could go skating, and very little entertainment for kids our age at that time.
Well, I have found out that the theater is not at the building. The building's still there, but it's not a theater anymore, but there was one before that.
That theater was down where the senior citizens building is now, down on the corner. The bank's on this corner, and the theater was down on the other corner.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I remember the theater, the other one, the one that still stands, and it was really a nice theater, especially for a town the size of Bruceton. When did, get a little personal, where did you meet your husband? Was he from here, or?
He lived just up here on I Street, and I lived on Carroll Street, just across this way there. Lieber Hudson, you remember Lieber Hudson? Mm-hmm. He owned the house right across from William, and William would cut across his yard to come over to my house, and he would say that he was going to make him plant grass seed where he was wearing the grass out there. But that was 53 years ago. We just celebrated our 53rd anniversary.
No, congratulations. And I know it's
June the 3rd. June the 3rd.
It's been a very fruitful and loving relationship, I know. Do you remember what you did on the first day?
Went to a ball game.
Went to a ball game.
Like you say, you know, there wasn't much else to do besides go to the ball game and then go to the show every time it changed.
Yes, ma'am. Do you remember what it cost to get into the movies back then? Probably.
No. And you wouldn't believe me if I told you. You probably couldn't believe it if I could remember and told you. Very little, I assure you. I can remember lots of times when we'd have a date, we'd put 50 cents worth of gas in the car. Put 50 cents worth of gas in his mother's car. And that would go as far as we were going that night. And now you can't get the nozzle out of the thing to put in the car for 50 cents.
Okay, you said you went to work for the school in '62, and we've already talked about the principal at that time and superintendent, I believe. Mr. Herndon was the superintendent. What principals and superintendents have you worked for through the years?
Okay, let me look at this so I won't miss it. 7. I had 7 bosses. I started with Mr. Herndon. Then Harold Lee, took Mr. Herndon's place, and then I went to Coach Mack, and then Steve Wilkinson, and Cliff Sterling, and Jackie McGee, and I finished with Jackie McGee, retired with Jackie McGee as principal.
Well, what would you say were the biggest changes in the school from when you began working until the time you ended? Paperwork, more regulations.
Maybe automation. That's probably the biggest thing, because I was, and I don't want to be negative here, but I was lucky that I retired before so much negative things started happening in school systems. When I was working, that you never heard a teacher wanting to retire. They were not looking forward to retirement time. But because society's changed and there's less discipline in the home, and that kind of thing, teachers have a harder time now than they had when I was teaching. I think you can't get away from that. It's just harder to teach than it used to be.
Yes, ma'am. Backing up again a little bit, when you're in school, who are some of the people you remember as maybe leaders or interesting characters, or
you're talking about students or teachers?
Students while you were in school.
When I was going to school. When I was going to school. Oh, let's see. I'm not going to mention his name, but we talk about kids being rambunctious now. But I remember one time we had a play at school, and one of the characters in the play was a little inebriated, and he climbed in behind. There was 2 rooms on either side of the stage, and he climbed in the window, and he did his part, and he climbed back out the window and left. And Miss Margaret was doing the play, and I don't really know if she ever knew the condition he was in when he did that. When he did. So you see, kids don't really change. They have different things to entice them, but kids are kids, regardless of how long ago it's been.
Yes, they are. Any other memories that stand out particularly about when you were in high school?
Enjoyed home ec. I always enjoyed home ec. I thought that probably was the subject I enjoyed the most and has meant the most to me down through the years.
Who taught home ec at that time?
Evelyn Pace was a home ec teacher.
Evelyn Pace.
Evelyn Pace was a home ec teacher.
We have mentioned some teachers that were legendary here, I guess. Stayed here a long time. I know taught several different generations of teachers. Maybe you might give me your reflections on Miss Anita Herndon to start with, maybe, as a teacher.
Oh, I could talk forever on Miss Anita Herndon was the Jacqueline Kennedy, She was that type of person. She was a regal lady who meant a lot to all of us.
Okay, another person that's meant a lot to the school, Miss Margaret Jenkins, and your reflections on Miss Margaret.
Oh, Miss Margaret run a tight ship and had strict rules, and you obeyed those rules, but she loved her kids. She loved her kids. Yes. And was a multi-talented person. She was a teacher, and she was a musician, and she had talents as far as directing plays, and she was just a talented person.
Okay, another teacher that stayed for years, Miss Marjorie Smith.
Marjorie Smith, as in a secretary teacher position, and she was another regal lady, another Southern lady that wanted the best for the children, for the students.
Yes, ma'am. going back a little, some recollections on Mr. Herndon, Joe Ted Herndon.
Well, he was rough, tough, and everybody loved him. He was rough and tough, and everybody loved him.
Okay.
A funny thing. Let me share a funny thing with you.
Oh, I love it.
You know, Mr. Herndon was bullheaded. You know, I mean, that's not being disrespectful. He was
What?
bullheaded. And we used to have harvest carnivals, like we have today, and we'd have king and queen. And the only thing was that you didn't bring the money in until the night of the harvest carnival. So we had dish pans of money. And one night we were up in the old home ec room counting the money. And he picked one of those dish pans up, and Miss Anita said, "Joe, you can't carry that down the steps." And of course that was just like waving over a red flag when she said you couldn't carry it. And he picked that dish pan full of money up and got about halfway down the steps, and we heard this horrible racket. And of course we expected Mr. Herndon to be at the bottom of the steps, but he was not at the bottom of the steps. It was the dish pan that was at the bottom of the steps. And we had money scattered from one end of that school to the other. And every time I see a jar of money being collected for Harvest Carnival, I think about Mr. Herndon and his money. It's scattered all over the school.
In your reflections on Mr. Harold Reed?
Harold Reed was a good man who got a raw deal. If you remember, he was the board voted to not rehire him, and they brought in PC to Spain, and I won't even comment on that.
Go there.
But Mr. Harold Reed was a good man, and you know, that's all I have to say about it. I enjoyed working with him. He was a good man, and I just feel he got a raw deal.
Okay, your reflections on Mr. Cotton King, Everyday King.
I never worked directly with Cotton King. He was elementary. You know, he was elementary principal, and he had an office off of my office. But I never worked directly for him. But nobody ever loved the school more than Cotton King. Nobody ever cared more about the students or loved the school more than Cotton King.
Yes, and we hope to get an interview with him soon about the schools with him. Mr. Cliff Sermon.
Oh, Cliff and I are buddies. Cliff and I are buddies still. And I enjoyed working with Cliff. Cliff was a good school man, from principal on up to superintendent.
And Mr. Jack McGee.
Well, I said in my retirement speech that of all the people that I worked with, he probably had more confidence in me than anybody, because he had to. Well, that's one of the things I said, because he was in new territory for him. But he and I had a really good relationship, still do today.
I know you did, because he told me you trained him. You were. You always hear the first people you get to know at the school, the pirates, the secretary, and then you get to know the lunchroom ladies. Anything you'd like to share, humorous story? Oh, another teacher I think was the librarian, Miss Johnson.
Yeah, Geneva Johnson.
Miss Geneva.
Yeah. Of course, I enjoyed Geneva. She was a student council sponsor, and had a lot of contact with her because she had more office work for me to do, because she was student council president sponsor than I would have just an ordinary teacher. And we got to be good friends because of that. And then, of course, Paulette Cruz was my sidekick, because we shared that suite of offices for a lot of years after I moved over to the high school building. And
you weren't behind all those pranks, were you?
No. I didn't have a thing to do with those.
Any special memories you'd like to share? Funny stories, sad stories, good, hope stories or human interest stories?
One of the greatest privileges from working there is, even today, when I'm in a store, I'll see somebody, I'm coming up on 10 years retirement. And it's just mind-boggling, the people who still remember me and say, "Oh, Miss Freeland, how are you?" And they'll say, "You don't know me, do you?" And of course I do. I just could not call their name. You know, there's too many of them for that. But but they'll say, "You don't know me, do you?" And I'll say, "Oh, I do too." And I do. I just don't remember their name. And someday somebody's going to call my hand on that and say, "Well, who am I?" And I'm going to be red-faced.
Well, I'll have to say that you were at school when I was there, and you look as good today as you did then.
Well, bless you.
Let's move on outside the school a little bit. What do you remember about some of the businesses in town, some of the owners of the businesses, and just some of the general characters around town?
Well, it's hard to believe now, but you know, there was a time when we had a thriving community here. You know, we had the downtown, every store downtown was in business, you know, had businesses in it. And it's sad to walk down the street and see that. Of course, DBR, R's Variety Store, you know, when that was there. And Mr. R was a monkey, you know, he cut up with everybody. And when my girls would go in there, and, you know, you'd go in there just to look around, it was just like a 10-cent store. It was the Walmart of the day, you know. And my younger daughter would go in. Her name is Betsy, and the older daughter is Jennifer. And he would go, my younger daughter would go in, and he would say, "How are you today, Jennifer?" And she'd say, "My name is Betsy." And he would do that every time she went to town. He would say that just to get a rise out of her, you know, just to make her mad. Of course, there was a soda fountain at one time in Smith Drugstore up on the corner. The drugstore's been there for as long as I can remember, and there was a soda fountain there. It had little ice cream tables in it, and that was a after-school place to gather.
I think, did Mr. Orr at the Five and Dime, did he have a soda fountain?
Yeah, he had a soda fountain there up in the front of the store, and I had really forgotten about that, but he did have a authentic soda fountain at one time in the store. And then there were grocery stores, you know, It's unbelievable with the progression of time that at one time we had a grocery store in the town of Bruceton, and now we don't have a grocery store as such in the town.
I know there was at least two, maybe three.
Hills Grocery, Willard Park and Red Larkin had a grocery store, and then Willard had it later by itself. But it's unbelievable how much the town has digressed instead of progressed in some ways.
Right, economically, and of course several things happen.
Railroad was a big problem for us when the railroad shut down here in Bruceton. It was that was devastating. Maybe not as bad as Siegel, but in some ways it was.
Yes, of course, Interstate 40 cut a lot of traffic that used to pass through this area. Any other businesses you remember in particular, or people or characters from those businesses?
I remember telephone office used to be up over the bank. Yeah, there was a room up at the front of the bank, up over the front of the bank, and the telephone office was up there. It was one of these, you know, kind of telephone offices. And when we had the tornado back in the 50s, you remember the
52?
Yeah, the 52 tornado that destroyed downtown. Miss Bertha Wadley was a character here in town. She was an old maid who was the telephone operator, and Miss Charlie Tier called her. You know, you call the operator and get information from the operator at that point. And she called and wanted to know what in the world is going on. It was in the night, and she heard, Miss Tier heard a lot of noise going on and people moving around, and she said, "What in the world is going on, Bertha?" And she said, "I'm sitting up here with no roof trying to straighten people like you out." And the roof had been torn off of the telephone office upstairs during the tornado.
Speaking of the phone company, we had our own private company owned by the Thorne family for years. What was your first telephone number? Do you remember when you were a kid?
When we lived on Carroll Street, 211.
Yes, I was going to say it's probably 3 digits.
211. That's the number William called when he wanted.
That's the number William called. You ready to get you. Any other stories about tornadoes? I know I have seen a picture from your former neighbors, Carlos and Martha Rose Williams, and they had a car that showed broom straw literally stuck in the car. I guess it went in straight ahead and broom straw was in the car.
My dad, we lived just behind us up here on Ash Street, and we were living with William's mother and daddy at that time. And I remember it tore the side of the front porch off. Just there was very little damage where we were living. And we were looking out, and I saw my dad's car. Of course, there were limbs everywhere, and I thought that he was trying to get to us to see about us, but he was foaming down the railroad, car foaming down the railroad, and he was trying to get home. He'd been there, and he was trying to find a path to get over on Carroll Street, but it was a terrible, terrible, terrible time for the town. A lot of damage, lots of damage done.
Do you have any memories of the Blue Dip or any idea when that was built, when they had the swimming pool there?
No, but there was a swimming pool there a long time. There was a swimming pool there. William and I married in '51, and there was a swimming pool there before then.
Yes, I think it was maybe the 30s, maybe.
But I don't know how. I don't know. No, I don't. I really don't know. I just know when I was in high school, it was there.
Do you remember? I'm sure you do, the Western Auto when that came in, Mr. Val. I think that was Shell service station. Any memories of the railroad going down, and did you ever just go down and watch the people come in and go in, or was the passenger train by your time more or less run its course?
No, I guess my memory that stands out the most to me was I had an uncle who was in World War II. And I remember one time we went down, the troop train came through, and he was on the troop train. And Rachel was aware that Howard was going to be on that troop train. We all went down to the station. And I don't recall if he was allowed to get off of the train, and we saw him. I just remember going down and seeing the troop train go through that Howard was on. Most people will tell you about the first Sunday in May in the trains, but I don't really remember doing a lot about that. I don't have memories about that a lot.
Any restaurants you remember?
Well, Miss Fanny had a restaurant down. Miss Fanny Ingalls, Miss Sonny Daniels' grandmother had a restaurant there, and William's mother had a restaurant uptown for a good long while. And Clyde Jordan started out downtown. I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
No, I wasn't.
But he had a restaurant. As a matter of fact, I was working for Clyde in the restaurant downtown when William and I married.
Now, what you said? William's parents ran a restaurant.
William's mother.
Mother, what restaurant she run?
I think it was just called Freeland's Cafe.
Freeland's Cafe. Do you remember?
And Clyde's Cafe.
Do you remember the City Cafe?
City Cafe. That's the one Miss Fanny had. City Cafe is the one Miss Fanny had.
Miss Fanny Freeland?
No, Miss Fanny Ingalls, Sonny's grandmother, had City Cafe down on the corner. And then, of course, there was the railroad, the depot place. There was a cafe down there. Yeah, Railroad Cafe.
If you could go back right now and something deep, what would you be craving?
Clyde's barbecue.
Clyde's
barbecue from Clyde. Then J.W. McMillan had good barbecue too. You know, he was over in Hot Rock. Well, he was down in front of the school for a while. Yeah.
Yes, made a fortune selling, I guess, barbecue and cigarettes to kids.
And Clyde, when I was working for him, I worked for him a little while down in his new place, and my favorite memory of Clyde is him saying, if there's too much on there, folks, just rake it off. Too much meat on there, just rake it off.
Well, someone I have not mentioned in my interviews, and I probably should have, because he has had a song written about him that made the national charts nationwide, was Shoestring Maxie. Any recollections?
I just use Shoestring. That's
Shoestring.
Yeah. He was the town character.
Yes, he was. Dogs followed him everywhere.
Yeah.
Would you like, of course, we've covered the changes in the building. I went to elementary school over where the Life Care is now. That was elementary. And And I think, of course, I will get that in the history. Mr. White has done a good job on that. I think the first one was a boxcar, caboose, or whatever. But I will say this about you, Miss Freeland. I had the privilege in my career to be a student and work with you, and you are a fine lady. And we sure hated to lose you at the school, and you're a treasure of our community. And I sure thanks for the interview. And is there anything you'd like to add?
You're quite welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.